Hello once again, everyone. To conclude Pride Month, we will be going over the shocking amount of misconceptions, or fictions, of the queer community in a new series I am calling Fact versus Fiction. In this new series, I will break apart various fictions for a variety of different topics. As mentioned, this inaugural episode is about the queer community, and let me tell you, we've got a lot to go through, so let's just jump straight into it. But before we do that, I just want to give a heads up that we will be discussing some triggering topics such as queerphobia. Fiction. There are only two genders. Fact. Gender is a social construct. What exactly is a social construct? A social construct is a term or concept that has been accepted by a wide range of people in a society. Many people in Western societies understand that how a person identifies may differ than what they were born as. For example, a person may be born male, but they identify as non-binary. Because people can identify with how they choose, there are a lot of genders and new ones are constantly popping up. Basically, there are three main categories of gender: cisgendered, transgendered, and non-binary. Cisgendered means someone whose gender and sex are the same, transgender means someone whose gender and sex differ, and non-binary means someone whose gender does not fall within the traditional gender binary. If you want to learn more, go watch the video linked in the iCard or at the end of this video. Fiction. You can only have XX or XY chromosomes. Fact. The concept of the sex binary isn't entirely reality. There are actually quite a few conditions that can cause a person to have a unique chromosomal pattern. First, let's discuss how sex is determined. A person's sex is determined via hormones and sex chromosomes. Humans have 46 total chromosomes, separated into 23 pairs of 2. The last 2 are what determine a person's sex. These are referred to as sex chromosomes. Most of the time, they come in 2 different variations, XX and XY. XX codes for female, while XY codes for male. While rare, some people have a unique variation of these hormones. These people are often referred to as intersex. There are a lot of conditions that can result in someone being intersex, but we'll just look at one for an example: Klinefelter syndrome. Klinefelter syndrome is a condition where a male is born with an extra X chromosome, making their sex chromosomes XXY as opposed to XY. This would make this person intersex. There are many other conditions that affect sex chromosomes, so if you are still curious, I suggest doing your own research. If I were to cover each condition relating to sex chromosomes, we'd be here all day. All you need to know is that the sex binary is not as true as some believe. Fiction. Transgenderism is a mental illness. Fact. While gender dysphoria is a mental illness, transgenderism is not, and not every person who is trans experiences gender dysphoria. Before we can break this point down, we need to break down what constitutes as a mental illness. There are various signs of mental illnesses, so let's just go through these one by one and see how they stack up against someone who's trans using a list of common signs created by Kimberly Holland for Healthline. Number 1. Not eating enough or overeating. Many trans people still eat properly, and if they don't, it's usually caused by a condition separate from their gender. Number 2. Having insomnia or sleeping too much. Many trans people are able to sleep normal amounts, and just like with eating, if they struggle with sleep, it's usually because of a separate condition. Number 3. Distancing yourself from other people and favorite activities. I can maybe see distancing themselves from others, but most trans people would do this because said others don't or won't accept them for who they are. As for distancing themselves from favorite activities, most trans people don't do this, as those activities bring them happiness and may even help them find friends. Number 4. Feeling fatigue even with enough sleep. Usually fatigue is caused by a different condition. Some trans people may feel fatigue due to having to deal with transphobia, but honestly, anyone would. Number 5. Feeling numbness or lacking empathy. Trans people absolutely don't feel numb or lack empathy. In fact, most of the trans people I've met tend to be super empathetic and full of life. Granted, that's more anecdotal, but you get the idea.
I made a boo-boo, yeah.
Number 7. Feeling hopeless, helpless, or lost. Again, these are common feelings for people who suffer from gender dysphoria, not necessarily people who are trans, as not every person who is trans experiences gender dysphoria. Number 8. Smoking, drinking, or using illicit drugs more than ever before. I've seen this being more common with trans people of the past, but that was because trans people were frequently the target of hate, arrest, homicide, harassment, and abuse. Drugs, including alcohol and nicotine, were seen as an escape, but again, they weren't doing drugs just because they were struggling with being trans, but rather the hate that came with it. Number 9. Feeling confusion, forgetfulness, irritability, anger, anxiety, sadness, or fright. Now, I have seen some trans people have these feelings, but usually when they suffer from gender dysphoria, are scared to come out, or are exploring their gender for the first time. Not all trans people experience these feelings, especially once they've become comfortable in their own skin, and again, transphobia can cause these feelings. Number 10. Constantly fighting with friends and family. I have heard of trans people fighting with family, but most of the time, these family members are conservative and very queerphobic. They're the ones who usually push the whole transgenderism is a mental illness or it's just a phase malarkey. Number 11. Having extreme mood swings that cause relationship problems. Again, this has nothing to do with transgenderism. Maybe gender dysphoria, maybe, but it would have to be a pretty extreme case. Number 12. Having constant flashbacks or thoughts that you can't get out of your head. It's not uncommon for trans people, especially older trans people, to suffer from PTSD due to the abhorrent treatment trans people used to get, and to a degree still do. Again, this has nothing to do with transgenderism and more with the horrible treatment people have received in the past and in the present. Number 13. Hearing voices in your head that you can't stop. Do I even need to say this? Trans people don't have a little voice in their head telling them that their gender and sex are different. Number 14. Having thoughts of hurting yourself and other people. Again, I have heard of people with gender dysphoria either having thoughts or actually harming themselves, but this is usually caused by distress rather than just being trans. The only time I've ever heard of trans people wanting to harm others is either transphobic lawmakers or transphobic family, and even then, they never actually do. Number 15. Unable to carry out day-to-day activities and chores. Again, most trans people are self-sufficient, and if they can't be, it's usually a sign of something else. And number 16, this one isn't actually on the list, but I want to add it myself, not being able to hold down a job. Most trans teens and adults are able to work and keep a job. The exceptions work for transphobic businesses or bosses. Long story short, transgenderism cannot be a mental illness because it does not tick off any, or at least most, of the boxes qualifying it as a mental illness. Fiction. Being gay is a mental illness. Fact. Pretty much the exact same argument I made with transgenderism and mental illness. Basically, being queer in any regard is not a mental illness. Stop calling things that you disagree with a mental illness. Fiction. You cannot change your sex. Fact. While there are limitations to transitioning, HRT and sex change operations have pretty much made changing sexes possible. Most trans people who do transition use what is called HRT, or hormone replacement therapy. HRT involves sex hormones, testosterone or estrogen, being either injected, transdermally administered, aka through the skin, or ingested. The hormone used depends on the sex the person wants to transition to. HRT has been found to be effective for things such as raising or lowering the voice, growing more hair, breast growth, and many others. Sex change operations usually finish the transition, but not every trans person has said operations. These operations include, but are not limited to, breast implants, top and bottom surgery, Adam's apple shaving, and facial feminization surgery. So yeah, you basically can change your sex. Fiction. Trans women in sports have a clear advantage and therefore should not be allowed to play in women's leagues or play at all. Fact. While there are indeed some differences between the sexes that can cause issues in certain sports, there has been little to no evidence that trans athletes, specifically trans women athletes, have the same advantages as their cisgendered or pre-transitional counterparts. A study performed by Front Sports Act Living found that most rugby players who have a significant advantage were genetically predispositioned to have said advantage and that it had very little to do with sex or gender. They also found that there were indeed differences between cisgendered and transgendered athletes, but because each person is so different, it's hard to get conclusive evidence that trans athletes have an unfair advantage. There are a few reasons for this. 1. Only about 0.5% of the population are trans, and even less of them are athletes. This is a very small number of people, making it harder to study these groups. 2. Pro athletes should not be compared to recreational athletes and non-athletes, and as previously mentioned, there are very few pro-trans athletes. 3. Being trans may or may not include gender-affirming care, so each trans person is different. While studies are limited, it has been found in various studies that, quote, trans individuals following gender-affirming hormone therapy become more similar to their gender identity, post-transition, cisgendered counterparts, or are somewhere in between the expected male and female averages, unquote. This, of course, begs the question, where did this myth come from? It came from the idea that male athletes could pretend to be a trans woman in order to crush the competition, or trans men would have an unfair advantage because they're on testosterone. We have already mentioned that this is not the case, and banning trans athletes will not fix the doping plaguing professional sports. Front Sports Act Living actually gives a pretty solid suggestion to address this issue, at least for rugby. They argue that there should be weight classes similar to wrestling and boxing, as regardless of sex and gender, people's sizes can vary. Either way, more studies are needed, but what we have so far disproves this harmful myth. Fiction. Being queer goes against the word of God. Fact. This is only partially true in one specific form of the Bible, the King James Version. The King James Bible was a revised Bible commissioned by English King James I in 1611. This Bible is occasionally denounced by certain Christian groups because King James I demanded that some of his opinions be forced in as gospel, diluting the true meaning of the Bible. This version of the Bible has a few lines discussing gayness, but I only know of one that explicitly states being gay is a sin, Leviticus 18:22. Timothy 1:10 is the only other line that I'm aware of that states being gay is a sin, but only in the English Standard Version of the Bible. Leviticus 18:22 states, quote, "You must not lie with a man as with a woman, that is an abomination." Timothy 1:10 states, quote, "The sexuality immoral, men who practice homosexuality, enslavers, liars, perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine." Unquote. You may have noticed that I used a passage from the English Standard Version rather than the King James Version of the Bible. That is because the version of Timothy 1:10 in the King James Version does not explicitly state gay sex, but rather, quote, "them that defile themselves with mankind," unquote. This isn't exclusive to just gay men. And herein lies the biggest issue I have with this argument. The Bible is over 2,000 years old and has been translated into hundreds of different languages and variations of said languages. This leaves two issues. One, the Bible is often left up to interpretation, and two, not everything gets translated correctly. Oftentimes, queer-phobic people will have these beliefs regardless of their religion, but now they have quote-unquote evidence that being gay is bad because of one singular passage in a book that has, thousands of pages? That's like anti-vaxxers using the singular study by Andrew Wakefield to claim that vaccines are dangerous and cause autism. Again, most of the Bible either doesn't mention gayness or it is left up to interpretation. If anything, the people treating the Bible as gospel are the ones going against the word of God. According to Timothy 1:5-1:7, quote, "But the aim of such instruction is love, arising from a pure heart, a good conscience, and sincere faith." Some people have deviated from these and turned to meaningless talk, wanting to be teachers of the law without understanding either what they are saying or the things to which they are making assertions. Unquote. Before I close off this section, I just want to mention a few things because I know a handful of people will either ask or make a big stink about it. 1. I myself am not religious. I just did my research and understand the brain rot that can arise from Christianity as I come from Polish and Irish Catholic families. 2. I am not attacking anybody for their religion. If you choose to follow Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, whatever, go ahead. I do not have an issue with religion in itself. I do have an issue with people forcing their morals on others, especially if it causes harm. And 3, I encourage everybody watching this video to please not harass or attack anybody over their religion. Just because someone believes in a god does not mean they are a bad person. Fiction. Gender and sex are the same thing. Fact. While true in the past, there's a clear difference between the two. As previously mentioned, gender is a social construct, and there are many genders often organized into 3 categories: cisgendered, transgendered, and non-binary. Sex is what you were born as determined by sex hormones and sex chromosomes. Just like with gender, there are 3 categories: male, female, and intersex. Fiction. The term cisgendered or cis is a slur. Fact. The term cis is used in a similar context as the term trans. It is used to discuss a person's sex and/or gender. Cis just means someone whose sex and gender are the same. Most people who find the word cis to be a slur typically are queerphobic, ignorant, or just trying to start drama. Fiction. Bi people don't exist. Fact. Bi people absolutely exist, and to say otherwise is extremely ignorant. An argument some biphobic people make is that someone who is bi is either gay and doesn't want to admit it, or straight and just wants to feel special. Usually these people making these claims are either closeted, ignorant, or just generally spiteful. Fiction. Gender and/or sexual orientation is a choice. Fact. This is absolutely not true. If this were the case, then why would anyone opt to be queer in a heteronormative/cisnormative society, especially if their parents are queerphobic? Spoiler alert, they wouldn't. And yet, queer people exist and are out. People are born queer and remain queer throughout their whole lives. You do, however, get to choose to be a bigot, so maybe make the right choice. Fiction. Asexuals suffer from some sort of hormonal illness. Fact. There is a difference between someone who has a low libido and someone who is asexual, and that is how distressed they are about it. People who have a low libido tend to be uncomfortable or concerned about their lack of sex drive. Asexuals are comfortable with little to no sexual interactions. Asexuals also often have normal hormonal levels. Yes, some ace folk can have hormonal issues, but that still doesn't mean that all asexuals are sick with something. Also, there are people who are not asexual who choose to abstain from sex for other reasons. They too do not always have hormonal issues. A lack of interest in sex does not equal hormonal issues in every case. Fiction. Trans people just end up regretting transitioning and detransition. That or transgenderism is just a phase. Fact. Some people do end up detransitioning, but this is a small minority of trans people. Not only that, but not every person who detransitions does so because of regret. According to an article by LGBT Health, quote, 82.5% of those who have detransitioned attribute their decision to at least one external factor such as pressure from family, non-affirming school environments, and increased vulnerability to violence, including sexual assault, unquote. Other reasons given include trouble finding a job, pressure from health professionals, and pressure from religious leaders. These kinds of mindsets are extremely toxic and are causing more distress among trans people, especially trans youth. Fiction. There is no reason to celebrate Pride Month anymore. Fact. This is one I've seen quite a lot this year in particular. Many people online, including members of the queer community, just don't see much of a reason to celebrate Pride Month anymore since gay marriage is legal in the US. That and massive corporations have taken over Pride and made it another corporate holiday. What Pride Month should be now is about celebrating how far as a community we have come and remembering those who have lost their lives due to queerphobia. Activism should still be a part of it. If it weren't needed, I wouldn't be making this video, but it should be more about celebrating and just generally having a good time. Fiction. Cishet people do not belong at Pride. Fact. Everyone is welcome at Pride events. First off, you have allies who fought alongside the queer community and should be allowed to celebrate alongside their queer friends and family. Also, just because someone is in a hetero relationship does not mean that they aren't queer. Bi, pan, omni, trans, ace, and non-binary people all exist and can be in relationships with the opposite sex. The only people who aren't allowed at Pride events are hardcore Christian conservatives who are just full of hate. Well, them and pedos. Many Pride events do have kids. Fiction. It is okay to bully and harass cishet people since queer people have been oppressed for most of history. Fact. This is absolute bull. It is never okay to harass or bully anyone for any reason. If you actually believe this, you are no better than those people who harassed you. There's already so much hate in the world, especially on the internet. Guys, we can be so much better than that. Also, this sets a really horrible example for queer youth. If they see that it's okay to bully cishet people, then they may become hateful themselves in the future. I know it's tempting sometimes, but the best thing you can do is just ignore them. Most of these people just want attention, so the less attention you give them, the less power they have. The good news is that most people who do believe that it's okay to bully cishet people are in the minority. I just want to bring it up because I should not have to tell people to not go and cyberbully others. Fiction. Drag queens and trans people are indoctrinating kids. Fact. I cannot believe I have to say this, but there is a tremendous difference between existing and indoctrination. Indoctrination involves forcing your beliefs on other people and manipulating them into thinking you are right. Existing is just being somewhere. This tends to be peddled by hardcore Christian conservatives in an attempt to demean the trans and drag communities. How ironic. Also, how is a trans person just living their life indoctrination, but forcing every classroom in the state of Louisiana to have a copy of the 10 Commandments, or forcing children to attend church and anti-LGBT protests not? Again, I don't care what you believe in. But if you force children to follow in your footsteps because you think you're right, that's when I start having issues. That and disowning kids because they don't believe in God. And don't force your kids to believe in the same shit you do if they do not believe in it. Good gods. Fiction. We should not be teaching children about the LGBT community. They're too young. It is never too early to teach kids about the queer community. Teach them young and teach them right. I agree that young kids don't need to know about gay sex, but the sooner you teach kids about the queer community, the more likely they'll grow up to be more accepting and less bigoted. Plus, some kids may know at an early age that they are queer, so teaching them that they are valid can help prevent mental anguish and confusion later on down the line. This argument is mostly made by those who support Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' Don't Say Gay bill, which will prevent schools from even mentioning the LGBT community to students ages 5 to 9, arguing that they are too young to understand, even though that is when most queer people know that they are queer, or at the very least, they know they're genderqueer. Fiction. You can't be queer and Christian at the same time. Fact. Yes, you can. There are many different sects of Christianity, and much of it is left up to interpretation. A prime example of someone who is both queer and Christian is the TikToker Claude Beauty. She is both an evangelical Christian and queer. He's also a prime example of just because someone is religious, that does not make them a bad person. Always remember, believe in what you want, just don't force those morals on others. Fiction. All trans people use HRT and/or have surgery. Fact. While most trans people do transition medically, there are some who don't. There are a few reasons for this. 1. Not everyone who is trans wants to transition. This could be due to fear, discomfort, or just a general sense of content in their own body. 2. They may be too afraid to transition. This is most likely due to not living in a supportive household, working in a non-supportive job, or living in a queer-phobic area. They could also be afraid of the procedure themselves and the side effects/recovery, especially with how invasive surgery is. 3. They may not have the money. Hormones, doctors, and surgeries are super expensive in the States, especially for someone who doesn't have health insurance. According to the article by Psychology Today, quote, roughly 19% of transgender people in the US do not have any form of health insurance, unquote. The same article also estimates the cost of transitioning medically to be between $20,000 and $35,000 Canadian in 2019. That is insanely expensive for someone, especially without insurance. That's not including a therapist, who a trans person would need to get the okay from in order to continue with the transition, at least in most US states. Long story short, it's expensive and very difficult to do. Fiction. All trans people experience gender dysphoria. Fact. While it is common for trans people to experience gender dysphoria, not every trans person does. First off, what is gender dysphoria? Gender dysphoria is where a person feels great distress regarding their gender or sex. The DSM-5, a manual of mental conditions first published in 2013, states, quote, among individuals who are assigned male at birth, approximately 0.005% to 0.014% are later diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And, quote, among individuals who are assigned female at birth, approximately 0.002% to 0.003% are later diagnosed with gender dysphoria, unquote. Granted, these are estimates based on the fact that 1. These numbers are calculated based on people who seek treatment, and 2. These are based on diagnosed cases. There are people out there who never get diagnosed. However, these numbers are still really small, and thus proving that not all trans people have or currently suffer from gender dysphoria. Fiction. It is okay to guess someone's pronouns or not use their preferred pronouns. Fact. This is incredibly rude. If you are unsure about someone's pronouns, you should always ask. Do not guess. Intentionally not using someone's preferred pronouns is like someone calling you a name you don't like. Let's say that when you were a kid, someone gave you the nickname Pootie, and you hate that name. You run into a person on the street and introduce yourself using your true name. However, they refuse to use your real name and instead call you Pootie. You ask them to use the right name, but they refuse and continue to call you Pootie. That wouldn't feel particularly good, right? Well, that's what it's like to be referred to by the wrong pronouns. Obviously, if you had no idea, that's a bit different. Just make sure to use the right ones in the future. And remember, if you have no idea, ask. Fiction. Gender-neutral bathrooms are only for members of the LGBT. Fact. Just like with disability-friendly stalls, anybody can use gender-neutral bathrooms. They're there to use. It's not like the gender police are going to arrest you if you use a gender-neutral bathroom. It is considered common courtesy to use a gendered bathroom if they are available and you feel comfortable using one, unless there are no other bathrooms available. This leaves the gender-neutral bathroom open for those who feel more comfortable using it. Still, there's nothing wrong with opting to use a gender-neutral bathroom if you are not genderqueer. It's just a bathroom. Fiction. Trans women should not be allowed to use women's bathrooms because they are creeps in disguise. Fact. This one really pisses me off. This justification is mostly peddled by supporters of bathroom bills in mostly the southern states. First things first, you may be wondering, what the hell is a bathroom bill? Bathroom bills are state laws that prevent people from using a bathroom that differs from their assigned sex at birth. These are most common in southern and midwestern states such as Texas and Florida. Politicians and supporters frequently make the claim that trans people do not exist, and any trans woman who uses a women's bathroom is secretly a pervert in disguise. Basically, they want to make your private business their public business. Obviously, this is complete bull. I can't find any proof that these bathroom predators actually exist. Now, with that being said, I am not saying that these don't happen, but they happen so infrequently that there is absolutely positively no reason to have bathroom bills, and all they do is restrict trans access to bathrooms and increase transphobia, stigma, and ignorance. Oh, and accidents. Fiction. Trans men are not men / trans women are not women. Fact. As previously mentioned, you can change your sex, and even if a trans person does not choose to transition medically, they should still be treated with respect, and if they identify as a different gender than their sex, just use their preferred name and pronouns! It's not that hard! And if trans men and women are not men and women in your eyes, what constitutes men and women in your eyes outside of what is in their pants? Do intersex people not count as people to you? What about women who had a hysterectomy? Also, what is in any person's pants is none of your business unless you are their doctor, and even then. Fiction. Gay men often molest more children than heterosexual men / are pedophiles. Fact. This one's a bit of an older one, but it should still be addressed anyway. This was a common misconception in the 50s and 60s where many people believed that gay men were secretly pedophiles. Obviously, this is not true. A study performed by Jenny C., Rolster TA, and Poyer KL for the Kemp Children's Center in 1994 found that, out of 352 cases of suspected sexual abuse in children ranging from 7 months to 17 years, quote, in 82% of cases, 222 out of 269, the alleged offender was a heterosexual partner of a close relative of the child. Using the data from our study, the 95% confidence limits of the risk children would identify recognizably homosexual adults as the potential abuser are from 0% to 3.1%, unquote. Of course, this does not mean that queer people cannot be pedophiles, but at least according to the study mentioned above, a child is 2.65 times more likely to be molested by a straight close family member or partner of a close family member than a member of the queer community. With all of that being said, please do not go full paranoia mode and prevent your kids, if you have any, from interacting with any member of your family. This is a little overkill. Just pay attention to the signs if there are any, and always be there to listen if they need you. Fiction. Only gay men spread HIV or can get AIDS. Fact. Okay, nobody actually believes this one anymore, but I have to include it as a classic example of homophobia. So, for a little context, the United States suffered from an epidemic of an STD known as Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, or AIDS, in the 1980s. When the illness was first discovered in 1980, it was found that only gay men had the illness, giving it its original name of GRID, or Gay-Related Immunodeficiency. This led to widespread homophobia, especially people claiming that gay men are often filthy or disease-ridden. About a year later, it was found that heterosexuals could get GRID as well, so the illness's name was changed to AIDS, and while stigmas in the gay community were still high, it was on a decline. Nowadays, nobody believes that only gay people can get AIDS. This was a super quick and dirty explanation. If you want a more in-depth explanation on AIDS in the queer community, I suggest watching my queer history video. Fiction. Same-sex partners harm children. This idea is often peddled by heteronormative societies and their supporters, as well as our good buddies, the Catholic Church. Oh joy. In actuality, there is little to no evidence to show that children raised in a same-sex parent household have significant harm done to their physical or mental health. There aren't very many studies on this topic yet, as gay marriage has only been federally legal for about 9 years, with same-sex couples being able to adopt federally only about 6 years. But the limited studies that have been performed, ignoring the ones done by the Catholic Church, have shown that children raised in same-sex households are no different than children raised in heterosexual households. Fiction. Gay children are only gay because they were molested as kids. Fact. Okay, first off, this is absolutely disgusting. Second of all, no. If this were true, every person who was molested as a child would come out as queer, and every queer person would have had to have been molested. I'm just gonna say this all for the people in the back. You do not get to pick your sexual orientation. You are born queer. Fiction. Non-binary people, especially agender people, always appear androgynous. Fact. While many non-binary individuals do choose to dress androgynously, not all of them do. Regardless of gender, people can express themselves however they want, and this includes non-binary people. Just take a look at Frankie Stein from G3 Monster High. They are non-binary, but still have that preppy femme style from previous generations. They even have long hair and wear skirts, but they're still accepted as an NB in-universe and by fans. Just because an NB person dresses more masculine or femininely, that doesn't make them not an NB. Your identity and how you express said identity don't always have to match one-to-one. Fiction. Pronouns are not real/do not matter. Fact. Has anyone ever referred to you in the third person, saying things such as, "I hope she's doing well," or "How has he been? Congratulations! You have pronouns!" Pronouns have existed since the dawn of formalized speech and are often used as a substitute for a noun or proper noun. Some people use different pronouns than the ones they would have been assigned to at birth. For example, I was born female but prefer they/them pronouns since I identify as agender. As mentioned in the Pootie example, it's important to use people's preferred pronouns. It's just basic respect. You got that, Pootie? Fiction. Queer people are hypersexual. Fact. The fact that asexuals exist should already dispel this myth. Granted, this myth is geared more towards gay men specifically, but even then that's not really true. Sexuality, regardless of orientation, exists on a spectrum. Some are hypersexual, some fall more under average levels, and some are even asexual. Plus, this is primarily from my experience, most hypersexual people I've known were straight. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Fiction. Asexual/aromantic people just haven't met the right person yet. Fact. As an asexual person myself, I find this to be rather distasteful. Not every person has sexual and/or romantic attraction, and to apply otherwise is pretty disrespectful. That's like telling a gay person, "Oh, you just haven't tried straight sex." Or telling a straight person, "How could you know you're not interested in gay sex if you've never had it?" Basically, some people just know that they don't want sex or are just disinterested in it. Fiction. Maps and zoophiles are part of the queer community. This is something I do address in the ABCs video, but I'll go through them here. MAP is short for minor attracted person, aka a pedophile. This community is an attempt for pedos to rebrand themselves as a protected community by claiming they are part of the LGBT. They did this because they want to be able to be void of criticism. Obviously, this consensus has only been accepted by members of the MAP community rather than the queer community as a whole. In fact, the queer community has denounced the MAP community. The other is the zoophile community, sometimes referred to as the Zeta community, with the Greek letter Zeta representing the community. Zoophiles are people who are sexually attracted to animals, usually dogs and horses. Again, some zoophiles have compared themselves to the queer community, including their struggles. The Zeta community has also been struck down by the queer community for a similar reason as the MAP community. That reason being that both of these communities have sex with beings that cannot consent. So, regardless of what these people say, Zeta and MAPs are not a part of the queer community. Fiction. All gay people are super flamboyant and it's easy to tell if someone is gay. Fact. Just like with non-binaries, gay people express themselves in various ways. Some queer and even straight people may choose to dress or act in a way that is seen as flamboyant. Most of the time, gay people, and queer people in general, tend to look like the average person. You cannot tell if someone is gay just by looking at them. Put away your gaydar and ask if you're unsure. Fiction. It is dangerous for trans youth to medically transition, especially using puberty blockers. Fact. Because most trans minors are unable to get gender-affirming care in the US, many people believe that minors transitioning medically is super dangerous. In actuality, if under the supervision of trained medical professionals, it's pretty safe. Puberty blockers seem to be the big bad. Puberty blockers are a special type of medication that temporarily pauses puberty. Puberty blockers are often used by prepubescent to early pubescent minors to either allow them to experience puberty as the opposite sex, or to temporarily pause puberty for those who are going through puberty too soon. These medications have to be taken consistently, as when a person stops taking them, they will continue puberty. While more studies are needed, and of course there are risks, transitioning medically is seen as generally safe and can help treat gender dysphoria in minors. Fiction. There is no way a child can know that they are queer, they are far too young. Fact. According to Pew Research, most kids would start identifying as either gay, lesbian, or bi between the ages of 10 and 13, and according to an article by Know, that's Kuow, some kids know they are trans as early as 3. Some parents even said they first started noticing their child calling themselves by the opposite sex at 18 months to 2 years. So yeah, kids know they're queer from a young age, which is why education is so important. Fiction. Non-binary people don't exist, and that any AFAB who identifies as non-binary is really a tomboy who just wants attention. This is a belief I've been seeing a lot recently, and it's just simply not true. There's a difference between someone who identifies as a tomboy and someone who identifies as non-binary. A tomboy is typically a cisgendered or transgendered girl or woman who is interested in hobbies and topics that are often associated with boys or men, such as cars and sports. Sometimes, tomboys dress in a masculine or androgynous style, but not always. Someone who is non-binary is a person whose gender does not align with the traditional gender binary. I believe the reason that the term tomboy is falling out of favor is because it was often associated with gender roles of the past. Up until the 1970s, many girls and women were expected to be ultra-feminine, wearing dresses and skirts, spending all day in the kitchen, and bending to the will of the man of the house. Tomboys were also often seen as a rebellious phase back then, but with the rise of gender-neutral activities and spaces, as well as the denouncement of traditional gender roles, the term tomboy has fallen out of favor somewhat. It's seen as pretty normal for young girls and women in the West to wear masculine or neutral clothing, have short hair, and enjoy things such as skateboarding and action movies. Tomboy is also usually a phase or style rather than an expression of one's gender or sexual orientation. It can be in some cases, but more often than not, it isn't reflective of one's sexuality or gender. And finally, fiction. Asexuals and aromantics do not belong in the queer community because of their lack of sexual and/or romantic interest. Fact. What constitutes someone as queer? Simple. Someone who is queer is a person who is not cisgendered and/or heterosexual. Even though asexuals and aromantics may not feel any sexual and/or romantic interest, they are not hetero and therefore belong in the group that is literally made up of sexual and romantic minorities. Also, just because someone identifies as ace and/or aro, that does not mean they have zero interest in sex or romance. They both exist on a spectrum. And there you have it, a shocking amount of queer misconceptions dissected and destroyed to varying degrees. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and feel free to include anything that I may have left out. That's all from me today. Peace, love, and Roxy. Hey guys, editing Cassini here. I just want to add like a little ending here that's like completely unscripted and stuff, and just kind of explain like why this video is so freaking late. Couple things. One, I didn't actually anticipate for the queer history video to come out on the day that it did. I just felt like that was a more appropriate time because if you didn't know, that was the 55th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, a major historical event, and I thought just posting a queer history video on that day just seemed very fitting. One, two, that video also ended up getting delayed because, you know, I was busy with cat sitting and I just didn't really have access to much of my equipment or have that much time to like start editing and stuff. Especially because the house that I was at was having like renovations done, so it wasn't like I could just work on the video, especially with recordings while they're working, because they're like, drilling holes in the wall and all that stuff coming in and out. Yeah, so anyway, but that video just ended up getting a little delayed. As for this one getting as delayed as it did, partially it was because of the queer history video, but also partially because basically the software that I was using beforehand was Microsoft Clipchamp, which is a free, extremely simple video editor that comes like with every Windows computer. Yes, I'm a Windows user, deal with it. But just like it doesn't work for long content. It really is made for short form content, which is fine, but the issue is that like the previous 3 videos that I had edited on there were totally fine, and then this one, it was just a complete mess. Like, it was so unstable that it was practically unusable with just how bad it was. Like, it would crash so bad I would have to restart the whole program. It would freeze. It would lag severely. And, excuse me. Like, it was really bad. Like, it was pretty much unusable with just how buggy and glitchy and just overall terrible it was. So instead, I had to find a whole new program, but I didn't really know of any that were free. I'm not exactly made of money, and a lot of like good editing software is really expensive. Like, the one I really want to use is iMovie, but I don't have a Mac, at least not yet. But I had to find like a free alternative, and I didn't really know of too many. And then I was looking through Reddit, and I discovered the software called DaVinci Resolve. And I'd heard of it before, but I thought it was like a paid piece of software. It turns out it actually is, but there is a free version. There's Resolve, and then there's Resolve Studio, with Studio being the paid version. Anyway, so I basically gave up on Clipchamp with this video and decided to install DaVinci Resolve, specifically DaVinci Resolve 18.6, which was the last official full release of DaVinci. And I tried it, and it was also extremely unstable and practically unusable. And I at first thought it was something wrong with my computer. I admit I do pretty much everything on a laptop. Again, I just don't really have the money for a full desktop, and a laptop just better suits my needs for things like school, for example. But yeah, I thought it was that, but I checked the specs, and my laptop, who I named Aeon, in case you didn't know. I name my laptops. Yes, I'm weird, but I have a lot of them. Anyway, but with Aeon here, like, her specs were perfectly fine. Like, she had the 16 gigs of RAM. She had 8 gigs of VRAM, which you need at least 2. She had plenty of storage space left over, at least enough to download and run the program. Like, the GPU was totally fine. Maybe not necessarily for 3D stuff, but, like, I'm not planning on doing much in 3D. Like, all the specs were perfectly fine, and I was really confused as to, like, why it wasn't working. Because, like, basically what would happen is, if I imported anything, so add, like, audio clips or video clips or whatever into the software, it wouldn't work. It would lag and then eventually crash. So I was like, what the hell is going on with this? And it turns out what ended up happening was it was a lot of the extras and like add-ons and plugins and stuff, because I also went on the internet. I think I went on Reddit again, or some sort of forum, and it turns out that a lot of the stuff that is on DaVinci Resolve apparently can cause major slowdown and bugginess and glitchiness and all that stuff. So that was fun. So I had to uninstall 18.6 and ended up installing Resolve 19, which is the most recent release. I would have done this originally, but it's still in a beta phase, and I get really nervous about things that are in like early access or in beta because they may or may not work. So I was really nervous about this, and that's why I didn't install Resolve 19, because it's in a public beta 4 to be specific. And so I was like, oh, I don't know about this, but I had no choice, I had to install it, and I do, and it works like infinitely better. It still has its moments, like, if I have the video playing, either normally or in reverse, because you can play in reverse, which is really funny, it will like kind of glitch out a little bit, but I think that's pretty normal. And then like the only major issue I had was importing media, specifically pictures. Audio, video, it can do those no problem. If I were to import a picture, it would like freeze. It doesn't crash, but it freezes. And again, my specs on my laptop are perfectly fine. It is capable, like Aeon is capable of running the software. And yeah, it would just like freeze. And so I'd have to like basically force a restart on the program, which is part of the reason that this video doesn't have a lot of pictures. So anyway, but I did finally get it working, and I don't know what I'm doing, basically. How do I explain this? Basically, I'm very used to editing in a specific way just because of how simple Clipchamp is to use, and it already has a ton of like pre-made assets and stuff. And Resolve does not. So I don't really know what I'm doing, basically, especially because I have to learn a whole new software. And unlike Clipchamp, this is like professional grade stuff, so I don't know what the hell I'm doing. It's like me learning to use Audacity all over again, and even then. So just a few things I want to address as to like why this video doesn't have a whole lot of visuals is, one, I was trying to replicate the editing style of what I was doing in Clipchamp, which was like limited pictures and a lot of text, a lot more text, but it wasn't supposed to be like this non-picture heavy, I guess. It's just, again, with DaVinci being as buggy as it is when it comes to uploading images, and of course my constant fear of copyright and companies overusing it, that became a bit of an issue. Number two is, again, I just felt like there just didn't need to be too many images. I'll be honest, I feel like I used too many pictures in the queer history video. I don't know if I actually did or not, but I feel like I did. It just felt like a lot of those pictures had nothing to do with the actual video, or if it did, it just, I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I just felt it was a little too picture heavy, honestly. Especially because sometimes, like, when I'm writing scripts, I'm really bad at, like, explaining things. Maybe that's just me being autistic, but I feel like I have to like explain everything because, like, to me, when I'm talking about subjects like this, like educational content, I feel the need to explain it to like everybody as if they don't know what the thing is, and that's kind of like what my intended audience is for these videos. But like I felt like I just need to explain more stuff, and with the pictures, it just, I don't know, I just felt like I overdid it. As I also noticed way too late into the editing phase is that a lot of the text is really hard to read against the background. That is because DaVinci does not have very many text options in comparison to Clipchamp, and a lot of them don't have a background. I can't really put a background in. So, yeah, my apologies for the text being really, really hard to read. I'd suggest if you're really struggling, leave like a timestamp in the comments of like a section you're struggling, and I can try my best to make it work. I tried my best to like make it as visual as possible, but yeah, no. I'm still like trying to figure out how to use DaVinci. And then of course, you might have noticed some weird audio issues, especially when I talk about like the map community. You might notice it says the map community, like really weird and stuff, and there's some like audio glitches and stuff. That is because like the way I've been recording my audio is I will take basically I'll read each sentence in like on the script bit by bit, and then I will like start recording and then pause, catch my breath, scroll down, try to not stutter too much, and then the next sentence I continue this recording, yada yada, until I finish that section. And the reason I do this is because when I read scripts, I actually stutter like really, really badly sometimes. You can't really notice it too much when I record, especially if I'm going unscripted, because like I'm just kind of word vomiting at you guys right now. But I tend to just like be like, I'm gonna read the script, damn it. And it's easier to like cut out certain, like a section if I start stuttering rather than having to do the whole recording again, especially because I try to do so many of these in one breath, which is really hard to do. So yeah, the problem is like when I try to edit them down, because sometimes they'll be, as you can probably tell with this like section here, a lot of the times I take like really long pauses, either to catch my breath or kind of let my brain just kind of catch up to what my mouth is saying. And so I try to edit out those gaps if they're too long, and sometimes I end up cutting out too much of the audio, and so it cuts off. So if it sounds a little weird, that might be why. That, or if I hit the record button after I start talking, it might sound weird. So, yeah, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot I can do about that. I tried my best to fix what I could, but yep. And then as for the map community, I'm trying to remember what exactly happened with that. It was either like too large of a gap or I stuttered or something and I didn't edit it out, so I had to like re-record it or something. I also tend to slur my words a lot, so like words sound like they're all smooshed together or something, so it could be like a million and one different things. So, yeah, so, oh, one more thing is, I don't know if this will appear on your guys' end, but on my end, when I was using DaVinci, a lot of the audio tended to sound really weird. Like, either it sounded like one channel, so one ear was getting more of the volume than the other, and it sometimes sounded really glitchy and buggy. I don't know if that's DaVinci or if that was just the way the audio was done. But if that's a problem too, I apologize. I really did try my best with this video. It's just, I got so burnt out with it. It was a lot. It was just a lot to deal with switching programs and just doing all this stuff by myself. I can see why a lot of big editors have, or big YouTubers, I mean, have like big teams of people to do this crap for them. But I don't exactly have the money or the desire to do that. So y'all's just gotta deal with it. Anyway, well, apologies for the long rant at the end here. I just felt like I needed to get all that off my chest. It's just a lot happened with this video. A lot's been going on. Yeah. The next video will probably be something I call quick and dirty, which is going to be like just, how to explain? It's basically just a quick unedited video where I like show off something or I start talking about something because, you know, I'm going to go on another trip here briefly. So yeah, next one is going to be pretty quick and dirty. Anyway, I've gone on for like, what, 11 minutes longer than I should have. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and cut this recording off here. Peace, love, rocks D. Sorry about this whole mess of a video. Okay, bye.